Welcome back to another edition of Lettermen Live presented by Wendy's. You've had Wendy's nugs dipped in sauce, but have you had them covered in sauce? Wendy's new saucy nugs take the crispy and spicy nugs you love and turn them up to 11. Choose between flavors like buffalo, honey barbecue, garlic parm, or if you're a real heat seeker, try spicy ghost pepper. Only on Wendy's signature spicy nugs. I dare you. That's 7 delicious ways to try the nugs you already love. Pick a flavor, grab some extra napkins, and prepare to nug like you've never nugged before. For a whole new way to nug, it's got to be Wendy's, a participating U.S. Wendy's. It is Letterman Live. It is obviously presented by Wendy's, and it is Spencer Holbrook here with another edition of the program. We're going to talk Ohio State, Indiana in a epic top 5 clash. Well, it might be epic. We'll see. Hoping to get Tim May on here at some point to talk Ohio State, Indiana. But until then, we're just going to be talking about the Buckeyes. You guys know the drill by now on lettermenrow.com. On Thursdays, I post the 3 keys to the game. My keys for this week, pretty straightforward, to be honest with you. Limit explosive plays. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. We'll get into all of that and more throughout the program. Handle business up front. Obviously, the Seth McLaughlin injury changes everything. So now they've got to be able to handle the business up front without their leader, Seth McLaughlin, there in the middle, and then make splash plays early and get the horseshoe rocking. Ohio State has talked about it for a while this week and ad nauseum this week. The horseshoe's got to be rocking. You've got to get that place going. They've got to get that place loud. Ohio State understands that. They want it rocking. So if you make a splash play early, you'll probably get it rocking. If you go down 7 or 10-0, you're probably not going to have the horseshoe in a good spot. So those are my 3 keys to the game. We're going to get into those and a lot more here on the program. If you do have a question, submit it in the comments. I will answer some of them on the show. Again, I'm hoping to get Tim on here at some point to answer some questions as well on the show. So we'll see. But first question, do you believe there's a player who starts for Indiana who would for Ohio State? I think there's some good players on Indiana's roster. I don't know if they would start. I think that the tackle, as of right now, Carter Smith would start because with no Josh Simmons on the roster, if you had a guy like Carter Smith who could slide in at tackle and Donovan Jackson could stay at guard, I think you would probably take that. He's an Ohio native. Ohio State, could have potentially brought him in from the transfer portal. He ended up going back to Indiana after being in the transfer portal. So obviously that's that's a guy to know because I think that he could probably start there. I think it's D'Angelo Pons, the cornerback. He's a pretty good player. And I don't know if he would start with, Davis and Igbinosun and Denzel Burke there on the outside. But those guys haven't had, I don't think, the best year. So maybe that's a guy who, could push for some playing time. And then they've got a couple of guys there on the defensive line that I don't think would start, but would definitely play quite a bit for the Buckeyes there on the defensive interior, which obviously coincides with us talking about Seth McLaughlin and that injury as we move forward into Ohio State, Indiana, and we get to talking about that. Other than that, I think that's probably it. I still think Will Howard would start over Curtis Rourke, the former Ohio Bobcat. Unless I'm forgetting somebody major, I think I would say Pons potentially, and then the tackle, the Ohio native, the tackle, who would probably just start because Josh Simmons is now out. And so you would have him starting at a left tackle instead of, with Josh Simmons being out. Great question, though. I mean, that's something that, I've thought about a little bit this week in the build-up as far as predictions for the game are concerned. Again, if you do have a question, submit it in the comments. I'll answer some of these throughout the next 45 minutes to an hour. I think I'll probably go closer to 45 minutes if Tim comes along. We'll probably get an hour because you guys know how he is and how he likes to chat. So if that happens, we'll go an hour. It'll probably be closer to 45 minutes. Obviously, big news of the week. We'll start there. Seth McLaughlin out for the season, torn Achilles on Tuesday night. Lettermen Row reported that Tuesday night. It was first reported by the Columbus Dispatch. And then on Wednesday, when we talked to Ryan Day, he did confirm the news. So it's confirmed. He is now out for the season. It is obviously a massive deal that Ohio State's going to have to live with. There's not really much coming back from that until 12 months. And so he's not going to be back. So it's Donovan Jackson staying at left tackle. It is now Austin Sarabelt at left guard. It is Carson Hinsman at center. Ryan Day was pretty emphatic with that. They didn't really leave any chance for, the potential for a Luke Montgomery or a Josh Padilla. I think those guys are progressing well, but Ryan Day wanted to be full speed ahead with experience. Austin Sarabelt started 2 games at left guard to begin the season. That's a huge deal. That's key experience. With Donovan Jackson out those first 2 games, Austin Sarabelt picked up the mantle there and played relatively well. It was obviously against MAC opponents, and I think Sarabelt's had a little bit of struggles down the stretch here against some Big Ten competition. So it's definitely something to watch there at left guard. But as far as center goes, I don't think Ohio State's expecting much of a drop-off. McLaughlin was, I guess, in the running for the Remington Award, like a very, very good center, one of the best. In college football this year. It was him and Parker Brailsford at Alabama. He's now out, obviously. So it's Hinsman, who started 12 games last year at center for Ohio State, which is huge. You don't have many opportunities in this day and age of college football with NIL and transfer portal and all of the things that are going on to have a 12-game starter at center not transfer out when his job is taken by a transfer. And so the fact that Carson Hinsman stuck around, then was inserted in at left guard, now is being back inserted at center, I think that's absolutely huge. And a kudos to Ohio State for sticking with him, and kudos to Carson Hinsman for sticking around for year 3, because I think he's going to reap the rewards of that and this year and beyond, because he's going to be a big piece of the equation moving forward for the Buckeyes at center. That is kind of where this offensive line stands. Ryan Day talked a lot about it this week. Obviously, Wednesday night when we talked to him, just a lot of confidence in those guys. Emeka Egbuka said that they had their best practice of the season on Wednesday, which is a huge deal. He said a lot of dudes stepped up. I'm pulling up the quotes right now. We've got some good stuff about, Hinsman from Donovan Jackson, who's played next to him in 14 games. They played next to each other for 12 last year when Hinsman was the starting center and Jackson was the starting left guard. And then last year and then 2 games or 3 games when Jackson was at left tackle and Hinsman was at left guard. Donovan Jackson said, "We have a lot of confidence in him to go out and do what he needs to do. He's grown as a player and as a man. He's much better than he was last year. His reps at guard that he already has were already impressive. Now he's going to do it as center." Like, Ohio State is not worried much about the potential drop off at center. It's going to be a change because you've got a new guy barking out orders in the teeth of that line, and you're going against a really good defensive front from Indiana. But the bottom line is, like, it's not something that Ohio State feels like it is going to just be a complete cratering of this offensive line because Seth McLaughlin's out. No, they have a lot of confidence. And I keep saying that, but I want Ohio State fans to understand the mindset that the Buckeyes are carrying into this game. They have a lot of confidence in Carson Hinsman. If they didn't, he wouldn't have started 12 games last year at center, and almost beat Michigan on the road. They beat Notre Dame on the road with Carson Hinsman at center. They went into Wisconsin and won that game against a gritty Wisconsin team on the road with Carson Hinsman at center. Like, this guy has a lot of experience. And so the Buckeyes feel like if he can play, even at the level that he was playing at last year, they have a really good shot at doing some special things still this year. It's not the death blow that maybe some people thought it was right when the news came out, late Tuesday night that Seth McLaughlin will be out for the year. This is news that Ohio State can withstand, and the Buckeyes are excited to see what Hinsman and Sarabelt can do there in the middle. Now, with all of that being said, they're getting ready to face a Hoosiers defense that is not just stingy, like, it is downright good. They're giving 72.2 yards per game on the ground. The teeth of that defense is very, very good. They're gap sound. They have gap integrity. I know those two things mean the same thing, but it just kind of stresses, like, they are good up front and they do not allow a lot in the creases. And I think Ohio State's going to have to play a really good game to run the football against this Indiana front. And I think, to be honest, that was true with Seth McLaughlin playing center. It would be true if you were playing center. It would be true if I was playing center. Like, they're going to have to play one of their best games to run the ball, like a performance like they had against Penn State, to be able to run the ball in Indiana. Can they do it? I think they can, but we'll see. If it's one of those things where they're struggling early, I think they'll stick with it. We just saw Michigan play against this Indiana team. Michigan did not run the ball well. I think they had 65 yards rushing, but they stuck with it, A, because they have to, because that offense is bad, but B, because they continued to just wear on Indiana, and Indiana looked gassed at the end of that Michigan game. They looked tired. They looked worn down, and that is where the talent advantage for Ohio State comes into play. Just like, Indiana won that game, but Michigan on paper still had a talent advantage and a physicality advantage that I don't think the Hoosiers had seen all year. And I think Ohio State is even a step up from that. So we'll see how much that comes into play with this, because I think there's an opportunity for Ohio State to wear Indiana down as the game goes on. Mr. Bucknuts is picking 35-17. Buckeyes' depth is the key. I certainly think it is. Going back to the Michigan game against Indiana, we watched Indiana struggle in the second half. I think they had 30 or 18 total yards in the second half, managed to pull that game out because Michigan couldn't move the football. But I think if there was maybe 65 minutes on that clock, you're talking about a different outcome, because Michigan clearly was beating Indiana down in the trenches. So we'll see. The Seth McLaughlin injury throws an entire wrench into that, because if he wasn't hurt, then the storyline throughout the week would just be, okay, can Indiana hang for 60 minutes in the trenches? And now it's going to be a battle in there because you got a new center. That's just what it is. So that's obviously one of the keys to the game. Ohio State has to control the line of scrimmage no matter what. And that's what they plan to do. The other two other keys to the game, I already talked about them. Limit explosive plays. Listen, guys, Ohio State is incredible on defense no matter what. Ohio State is especially incredible on defense in the red zone. This is one of the top defenses in the country, in large part because it does not allow points, not just field goals. It does not allow points in the red zone. Teams are scoring just total touchdowns or field goal on 52% of their trips to the red zone against Ohio State. That is a remarkable stat. I don't remember seeing a stat quite like that. And maybe, okay, so the best in the country is Army. They've given up opponent red zone scores 10, and the opponents have been to the red zone 20 times. Opponents have been to the red zone on Ohio State 23 times. They've scored 12 times. It is really hard to score on this team in the red zone. So limit explosive plays means if you make Indiana drive the length of the field, you like your chances, if you're Ohio State, of them settling for field goals or not scoring at all. Now, the other side of that coin, of course, is what Indiana does. Indiana has the nation's best red zone offense. They score touchdowns on explosive plays. They score touchdowns from far, and they score touchdowns in bunches in the red zone. I think they're at a 97% red zone scoring clip. That is very, very good. And so it's one of those things where you say something's got to give, because they're really good in the red zone. So that's 95%. They've been to the red zone 56 times. They've scored on 53 of them. The number one red zone team in the country, of course, is Ohio State. They've been to the red zone 38 times. They've scored 37. And the only one that they didn't score, Will Howard fumbled the ball into the end zone on the 1 yard line, and he probably should have scored. So they should be 100%, but they're not. Indiana's 95%, but Ohio State is 52% red zone defense, which is, again, remarkable. The only team better in the country is Army. The next best after Ohio State and Army is Western Kentucky at 67%. So, it is a drop-off of red zone defense. That tells you how good the Buckeyes are. When it's a service academy and then a steep drop-off and something else, and it's for a good reason, it's not like passing yards, like maybe Michigan or Iowa would look. That's a pretty good thing. And so if Ohio State can make Indiana sustain drives, get to the red zone, and then play, not red zone roulette, because you expect to be able to hold teams like Indiana to field goals. Indiana scores a lot of touchdowns, though. If you can get them into the red zone and keep field goals, keep touchdowns, turn touchdowns into field goals, turn sevens into threes and threes into zeros, you're going to have a really good chance to win this game. Now, if Indiana hits explosives like Oregon did and beats you over the top 2 or 3 times for touchdowns from beyond the red zone, and you don't make Indiana truly grind out and drive the ball down the field, you're talking about a game that's going to get hairy. That's just the reality of this game. So That's key number two. Key number one, obviously, dominate the trenches despite having your backup center in there, and now another retooled offensive line. Number two, limit explosive plays, make Indiana get to the red zone. You like your chances in the red zone because Indiana is, while they're really good in the red zone, Ohio State, again, teams are scoring, not just scoring touchdowns, but just scoring on just over half their possessions in the red zone. And then the third thing, but maybe it should be the number one thing, is I know the home slate hasn't been great this year, but the Horseshoe has been a little, not sleepy. Maybe sleepy is the correct term because the night game was against Western Michigan. There's been a couple 3:30 games, and then there's been some nooners. And I know how people feel about the noon games. If you have opinions on the noon games, throw them in the comments. I'll read them. I will. Maybe even put them on the screen if they're safe to display. But the Horseshoe's got to be rocking. And the way that you get the Horseshoe rocking is it's going to be rocking to start the game regardless. We know that. We know what the Horseshoe is at the beginning of the game. But here's the places that Indiana has played other than Bloomington this year. They played in a half-empty Rose Bowl, and the part of the stadium that was full was a lot of Indiana fans who made that trip out to the Rose Bowl because they were playing in that stadium for the first time since the 60s. So there was a lot of Indiana fans that made that trip. They played in a half-empty Rose Bowl. Second road game of the year, they played in the Lakeside Stadium at Northwestern. I think that place holds like 15,000 people in the Northwest, and that's not a raucous environment. And then the third one was Spartan Stadium at night. They played Michigan State at night. Michigan State got out to a 10-0 lead, but we know this. We know Spartan Stadium because we've watched Ohio State and Spartan Stadium for a long time. That's not the most intimidating place to play in the world. And Indiana's played 7 home games. So next week they get their 8th home game against Purdue. This week they play their 4th road game, their 4th and final road game, and it's against Ohio State in the Horseshoe. None of the previous 3 environments, whether it's the Rose Bowl, the Lakeside Stadium at Northwestern, or Michigan State and Spartan Stadium, none of those 3 places compare to the Horseshoe. And so if the Horseshoe is rocking, and Indiana has not faced anything like that as a team this year at all, can you throw Indiana off its game with a loud environment, a hostile place to play, something that you don't really want to walk into, a hornet's nest, if you will? I think that can have a huge impact on this game. Indiana has not really been very battle-tested, and they especially have not been battle-tested on the road. Yeah, they came back from that early deficit against Michigan State, but that's a Michigan State team that's kind of limping to the finish line here at the end of the season, whereas this Ohio State team seems to be firing on some cylinders that we haven't seen them fire on so far this year. Not peaking at the right time, maybe not peaking yet, but yeah, I mean, the talent tells you that on paper, it tells you that Indiana does not have the dudes. I completely agree. We'll see if that plays out because, there's that X's and O's beats Jimmy's and Joe's saying. There's also hard work beats talent when talent doesn't, all of those cliches. But Ohio State works really hard too. So we'll see. But I just think that if Ohio State can get up early, whether it's 7-0, 10-0, an early strike down the field of Jeremiah Smith, a burst through the line into the open field by Quinshon Judkins or Travion Henderson, an early turnover, even an early sack, even an early 3-and-out, can get the Horseshoe rocking for a noon start, get the people on their feet, and get that place to where you want it to have that true home field advantage in the Horseshoe that we know that it can be. It hasn't been this year, but it can be. And I expect the people to come out in full force on Saturday for this one. I do. And I think that if these fans can have an impact, make it known that, yeah, it's a noon game. Yeah, it's Fox. We're mad at Fox, but we like the Buckeyes more than we hate Fox. The Hoosiers have never faced a running back as fast as Travion Henderson. I don't know if they've faced – well, I know they haven't faced a running backs as good as Travion and Quinshon for sure. I think Donovan Edwards and Khalil Mullings are pretty good players. I don't think they have the offensive line that they need in front of them. I think Mullings is probably third if you're ranking the 4. Did they play? They haven't played Caleb Johnson at Iowa. Yeah, they have not faced anybody like Travion, and they definitely haven't faced anybody like Quinshon Judkins who will just run through your face. I agree. They haven't played receivers like this. This is the best team that Indiana's played, and I don't think it's very close. Obviously, we'll see what Ohio State does against Michigan next week, and we'll talk about that game here. For Letterman Live presented by Wendy's, we will definitely talk about that game here. So next week is going to be a good one. I don't know when we're going to do the live show. I'll make sure to schedule it early so you guys know when to get in, get out, and get your dose of Letterman Live presented by Wendy's before the Thanksgiving holiday. Maybe you'll just take Wendy's to Thanksgiving after you hear all of this, because you've had Wendy's nugs dipped in sauce, but have you had them covered in sauce? And have you taken Wendy's saucy nugs to your family Thanksgiving? You probably should. Wendy's new saucy nugs take the crispy and spicy nugs you love and turn them all the way up to 11. Choose between flavors like buffalo, honey barbecue, garlic parm. Real heat seekers know to try the spicy ghost pepper only on Wendy's signature spicy nugs. That's 7 delicious ways to try the nugs you already love. Pick a flavor, grab some extra napkins, and prepare to nug like you've never nugged before. For a whole new way to nug, it's got to be Wendy's. So participating U.S. Wendy's. Beating Indiana on our way to Indiana. All right. Still don't have Trey's burst and out the gate speed. No, they do not, Doug. I completely agree. They do not have the burst. I'm going to roll into a couple takes here. I'd like, if in the comments, if you think that it's a hot take, let me know. I'm going to rate them on a scale of the Wendy's sauces, because we've got some saucy takes here. I've got a couple saucy takes. I'm going to reveal my bold prediction too for Friday's show here on the Lettermen Row YouTube channel. If you're not a member, or if you're not subscribed to the Lettermen Row YouTube channel, of course it's free. It's YouTube. Click subscribe below. You get a notification when we go live, when we post videos. Friday morning, we'll have our bold prediction show out. Myself, Tim May, Mick Walker. We've got some really good bold predictions this week. I thought it was a pretty good show. My bold prediction for this week was that Emeka Egbuka will have 100 yards receiving and 2 touchdown receptions. Why? Why is because against Oregon, he had 10 grabs for 93 yards and a touchdown. Since the Oregon game, the last 4 games, he's had 9 catches for 86 yards and 2 touchdowns, 3 catches, 31 yards against Penn State. He had a touchdown against Purdue when that game was already completely over and late in the second half. But he's been very quiet the second half of the year, and it's almost to the point where he's in jeopardy of not breaking the school records that we thought he was going to, which would really suck for Emeka, because he's worked really hard and he's been a really good Ohio State Buckeye. And I think that he would be a good person to have at the top of your record books if you're Ohio State. Former 5-star decorated guy, didn't have to stick around when he was, not being a feature receiver as a freshman. Sophomore year, just completely breaks out, has an incredible season, and even had a good game in the Rose Bowl as a freshman once Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson opted out of that game. I think so much of Emeka, because to be a 5-star and to be what he was, to then become, a team captain and things like that, and embrace, as Ohio State calls the brotherhood and all those things, like that is so cool to me. And I think it would be cool if he broke the record book. I think he's going to have a big game here, because he had a big one against Oregon. He had a big first half with those 3 catches for 31 yards against Penn State, and the Buckeyes kind of played bully ball. And also the possessions in the second half of that game were super low. So, you can't really blame Ohio State for not getting him the ball against Penn State, but this is another big one that you have to get him the ball. Doug, you're hitting the nail on the head with these comments, man. You're bringing the heat today. I would give you a spicy ghost pepper on the Wendy saucy scale for the way that you're there. The over under how many times Chip Kelly can scheme Jeremiah Smith one-on-one against the 5'9" corner. The funny thing is the 5'9" corner, D'Angelo Pons, is from the same high school as Jeremiah. They know each other. So we'll see if they get that matchup, because if they get that matchup, I think Will Howard's going to have the green light to go at Pons with Jeremiah Smith. That is a matchup that Ohio State is going to want to have. I would say if your take there is the spicy ghost pepper, I'll take mine at the garlic parm. I know that's not really a spicy take, but it can't be as hot as that take, Doug. Mark says 31-21 Ohio State. You're right. Similar ballpark that I was in, Mark. That's about what I had. We'll see if Indiana can get to the end zone 3 times. This Ohio State defense is playing so well, and that leads me to one of my other takes. My other take is that if Indiana doesn't score early, I think it's going to be a challenge for them to score at all. And I'm not predicting an Ohio State shutout in this game whatsoever. But it kind of goes in with the crowd and things like that. Like if you get the ball rolling with this defense, it is a dangerous operation. It is a very, very good operation. And I just think if the script doesn't work for Indiana, then I think you're going to know some things about the way this game is going to be played, because Cignetti is a really, really good coach, and he's had 2 weeks to draw up a script for how to attack this Ohio State defense early in the game, get Ohio State on its toes, go against Jim Knowles and that staff that does such a good job for Ohio State. If he can't do it with the script, and he can't do it early with the stuff that he installed during the off week, because they had a week off, unlike Ohio State, I think Indiana is going to be in trouble. Now, if they go down and have some success and still punt, but have some success or get a field goal out of it early on and, create a little bit of momentum for themselves, or even just a glimmer of hope there for themselves early in the game, that's when I think you're talking about an Indiana team that will play with some confidence late into the game and try to push Ohio State to win this game. It's weird to say that for a top 5 matchup, but that's what this is. Indiana hasn't really, I don't want to sound all SEC on you guys, but Indiana really hasn't played anybody of Ohio State's caliber. And there aren't many teams that are Ohio State's caliber, so you give them a little bit of a pass for that, but still. I wonder how much success Indiana will be able to have on Ohio State, like in the third quarter and late in the game. So we'll see. I think it's something to certainly monitor. Ohio State, for what it's worth, is outscoring opponents 121-9 in the third quarter of games this year. 121-9. It's absolutely remarkable what they do in the third quarter, and it's all due in part because Jim Knowles and the way that they adjust in game and the way that they adjust at halftime is nothing short of incredible. He's very good at adjustments. This is a veteran team. They know how to make adjustments, and so we'll see. Just getting the news that Bryce Underwood committed to Michigan. He's the number 1 overall prospect in the country for the class of 2025. He's the closest thing that a lot of the recruiting experts have seen to like a Cam Newton style quarterback. Tavian St. Clair is obviously the number 2 player overall in the On3 industry rankings. Bryce is the number 1 player. They're going to go at it for the next few years, and that is just super fascinating to have Tavian, an Ohio native, being the Ohio State quarterback at number 2 overall in America for the 2025 class, and Bryce being a Michigan native, being the number 1 overall prospect, and now going to be playing for Michigan, flip from LSU. Probably bad news for Brian Kelly and LSU, considering that was kind of what was keeping that thing together. Yeah, that's probably not good news. And Ohio State's had its quarterback locked in for a while now. It's got Michigan with their quarterback. Michigan is playing the game in NIL, folks. They are beefing that operation up. Watch Michigan here in the last few weeks before National Signing Day. They figured something out. I don't know if it's Barstool or if it's just the boosters being tired of seeing everybody else handle NIL, but they've got something figured out, and we'll see what happens. But before Ohio State can get to Michigan, it's Indiana. I talked to Ari Wasserman a little bit. I was going to get into this with you guys before we get out of here in about 15 minutes. I talked to Ari about this on the Lettermen Row YouTube channel. Go check that out. It's a really good conversation. I know some people don't like Ari. I know some people have some crazy opinions about Ari, and I know that Ari is an opinionated guy, and that's why I wanted to have him on the week before Ohio State Michigan to talk to him about Ohio State Indiana and Ohio State Michigan and just Ohio State in general. We talked a lot about the Michigan game and looking ahead to the Michigan game. And I told him that I think this being a top 5 matchup against Indiana is the perfect thing that Ohio State needed this week. Instead of having a cupcake game, which Indiana was honestly supposed to be, the Big Ten gave Ohio State and Michigan both very easy schedules in the month of November to try to get them both to the finish line to be a marquee game. That's what these leagues do, and you can see it in the way that they scheduled. So Michigan obviously opened the month with Oregon on November 2nd, while Ohio State opened the month with Penn State on November 2nd. But then after that, Michigan was At Indiana, they play Northwestern this week, and then they're at Ohio State. Ohio State, as we all know, played Northwestern and Purdue these last couple of weeks, and then was supposed to play a bad Indiana team before Michigan. Well, instead, now you've got a top 5 Indiana team the week before Michigan. Now, this is not new to Ryan Day, and that's the most interesting thing here. In Ryan Day's first season in 2019, Ohio State played a top 10 Penn State team in the Horseshoe the week before they played Michigan, and they won that game. The week before Michigan in 2021 was obviously the famed Ohio State-Michigan State top 10 matchup in which Ohio State decimated Mel Tucker, and the Spartans won that game 56-7, was up 49-0 at halftime. CJ Stroud put on the laser show there. Ohio State does a really good job of locking in on these kind of opponents the week before Michigan. Now, when it's a bad opponent, we know that Ohio State games the week before Michigan can get a little hairy. We talk about, 2018 Maryland, where if Maryland completes that throw, they win in double overtime. 52-51 is the final there. The week before, in 2022, Ohio State goes on the road and plays Maryland again the week before playing Michigan, and almost lost that game. It was a very competitive game with Talia Tungavailoa and a Maryland team that gave Ohio State all it could handle. Lathan Ransom blocks that punt, and the Buckeyes survive before playing Michigan. And then, we've seen it before, but we've also seen Ohio State play good teams the week before Michigan. This is a good thing for Ohio State to play a top 5 matchup. You have to have your attention on Indiana. There's no such thing as looking past the top 5 matchup to your rivalry game. You just can't do it because you'll lose a top 5 matchup. Then you won't play for the Big Ten championship. And so, regardless of what you do against Michigan, that's the thing that I love about this game is Ohio State cannot look forward to Michigan. And if Indiana was 7-4 or 7-3, or if Indiana was 5-5, I think you would talk about a game where Ohio State's go through the motions and just get on to Michigan week, because we've seen that song and dance before from this program. We've seen it from Ryan Day. We've seen it from the entire program, where right when you step into the post-game interview room, we step into it, Ryan Day wipes off the sweat under his hat, and then he says, man, we're on to the Michigan week. You're not doing that this week, because if you win this game, you just want a marquee top 5 game at home after playing 2 on the road and going 1-1 in those games. You're going to score a second top 5 win. You're going to celebrate that thing before you get on to Michigan. And so I think this is actually a really good thing for this team. They probably needed something like this right before Michigan. Indiana happens to be the team standing in the way of Ohio State playing Michigan. And right now, Indiana is the team standing in the way of Ohio State getting back to Indianapolis for the first time since 2020, when they beat Northwestern in that Big Ten championship game where Trey Sermon set the single game rushing record for Ohio State. So I like that this game is here at this time in the schedule. I like that it's kind of a pop-up top 5 matchup. Nobody really expected a top 5 matchup from these two programs. Obviously, they all expected Ohio State to be in the top 5. Nobody expected Indiana to be here. If Kurt Signetti did, he's lying. Okay. Even he would be lying if he told you that he thought they would be in the top 5 when they played against Ohio State on November 23rd. So it's remarkable what they've done. And now they've got to face their toughest test of the season, because Ohio State is laser locked in on this Indiana team and beating the Hoosiers and getting back to that Big Ten championship game. All right. Before I go through a couple games that I like other than Ohio State, Indiana, I'm going to give you guys 3 Buckeyes that I'm paying attention to this week, not on the offensive line. I could just give you Carson Hinsman, Tegra Shabola, and Austin Sarabell, tell you it's the interior, and we could go on with ourselves. We've already done that for 10 minutes earlier in the show. If you missed that, just rewind back, and then you can listen to the whole thing like it's live and pretend that I'm just talking to you in your living room or wherever you're listening to this live. And so we did a lot of offensive line talk at the beginning. I'm going to exclude those guys from this part of the conversation just so we can get some more names out there. One guy, number 1, the guy I have my eye on in this, number 1 with a bullet is Denzel Burke. If he plays well, Ohio State will win this game, because Indiana throws down the field just like Oregon does. Indiana throws back shoulder fades really, really well at a really high level. And they're going to try to pick on Denzel Burke. They're going to try to throw at him. Denzel has had, he'll tell you, it's not been his best season. It has not been a good season by his standards. And there's a lot of ways to recover from that. There's a lot of ways to rectify that. the number one thing he can do is play well against Indiana, not allow a big game from these Indiana wide receivers who are pretty good. It's probably the second best receiving core they've played this year, just behind those guys at Oregon. And Ryan Day said as much this week. He really likes these receivers. And he said that they could compare to the Oregon guys. Now, I think the Oregon guys are definitely better, but as Tim would say, but I digress. Denzel Burke has to play well. If he does, Ohio State will win this game because Indiana, I think, will have a lot of trouble running the ball. And if they can't throw the ball down the field, you're talking about an Indiana team that would have to nickel and dime Ohio State on multiple occasions to get down the field and score touchdowns, because I'm not sure how often Indiana is truly going to stop this Ohio State offense. I think if Denzel comes into this game confident, believing he can do it against these Indiana receivers who like to get the ball down the field and who like to catch those back shoulder fades, if he plays aggressive, because I don't know if he's played nearly aggressive enough this year, nearly physical enough this year, he could probably take a little bit of that physicality away from Davis and Igbinosun, balance each other out a little bit more, and I think they would probably be in better shape if we're all being honest with each other. All that to say, Denzel plays well, Ohio State wins. Ohio State can still win this game if Denzel doesn't play well. They've been winning with him not playing at his best all year. But the path becomes a little bit more difficult if Denzel doesn't play well. If he plays well, Ohio State wins. He's the number one guy that I'm watching this week. The number two guy that I'm watching this week is Carnell Tate, because we know about Jeremiah Smith. Doug Shepard in the comments already said, Jeremiah, one-on-one against 5'9" corner, you're probably going to win that matchup with Jeremiah. You could put, I don't know, any corner on Jeremiah. He's going to win a lot of those matchups. 5'9" corner, I'm going to take Jeremiah every single time. Then there's Emeka, who in the slot is very dangerous. Ohio State wants to get in the football. I already talked about it. I'm on the record for Friday morning bold prediction show at Lettermen Row, believing that Emeka is going to have 100 yards receiving and 2 touchdowns. But Carnell Tate has arrived, folks. Carnell Tate has been playing good football the last few weeks. Obviously, last week, the homecoming there in Chicago, an emotional game for him. But that's not the only thing that, he's done well here. Against Nebraska, 4 catches, 102 yards, and a touchdown. Against Purdue, 6 catches for 56 yards. Against Northwestern, 4 catches, 52 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Look, he had 100 yards receiving on just 4 catches. Now, that included a really long catch and run from Will Howard there in that game against Nebraska. But, he doesn't need a lot of catches to do his damage. And I think that's what makes him so intriguing. He's a guy who can have 2 catches for 71 yards and a touchdown. And how Indiana chooses to defend Ohio State, I wouldn't want to try to defend this Ohio State team. And I'm not paid 6 figures or even 7 figures to figure out how to defend them. Those guys are, so they try to figure out how to defend Ohio State. If you try to take away all of these receivers, they're going to run the ball on you. If you try to take away the run game, they're going to throw the ball on you, no matter who the offensive line is. And if you try to just take away Emeka and Jeremiah, Carnell is going to burn you, because Carnell could be the number 1 receiver on most of these teams. On most of these teams around the country. I think 120 teams would want Carnell Tate as their number 1 wide receiver. Now 133 others would take Jeremiah. And I think 130 would take Emeka. But I think 120 would take Carnell. And he's number 3 at Ohio State. So he's my second guy to watch. He's super important just because of the way that you can't take them all away. And the number 3 option sometimes looks like a number 1 when you try to take number 1 and number 2 away. Number 3 guy is going to come as a shock to a lot of people, but if you've been paying attention this week, you know that there's some buzz surrounding number 11, and I'm not talking about Brandon Ennis. I'm talking, of course, about defensive defender, I guess we will call him right now, because we just don't really know what it's going to look like. I'm going CJ Hicks, and you can call me dumb. You can tell me that I shouldn't go down this path. We've seen this before where he gets all the hype and then nothing happens. It was pretty interesting what Jim Knowles said about CJ Hicks earlier this week on Tuesday when we talked to him in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. He said, CJ has the talent and that skill, so I think his future is going to involve a lot more of that. What is that? That, of course, he was asked, Jim Knowles was asked about C.J. Hicks being on the edge and being a part of 2 sacks against Northwestern. The first step off the edge is absolutely remarkable. It is super quick and twitchy. This might be a situation where we look back at September and October and wonder why they didn't do this earlier. It could be nothing. It could be nothing. But I saw C.J. Hicks on the practice field on Wednesday night in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center working with Donovan Jackson. Donovan Jackson needing reps at tackle, of course. C.J. Hicks, he wasn't rushing the A gap. He wasn't rushing the B gap in those practice sessions. He was working against the tackle. Just some food for thought there. And then Jim Knowles says that his future involves a lot more of that, meaning out on the edge. And they used him a little on the edge at the end of the Northwestern game to see what he could do. Maybe I'm just taking a flyer here because I've got 2 guys that I know are going to play a lot, and then I'll take a third who's kind of a wild card. I'll be willing to pay the price of admission or pay to watch that. I want to see if Ohio State finally uses that jack position to its advantage, uses C.J. Hicks off the edge as a new way to create some pressure on Curtis Rourke, the Indiana quarterback, and see if they can create some havoc with a new look that Indiana really hasn't seen, hasn't prepared for in those 2 weeks between games with that off week. They've prepared for a lot of things against Ohio State. I don't know how much the jack was one of them. I'm going to be really intrigued to see what C.J. Hicks brings to the fold against Indiana, and then obviously that could springboard him into a bigger role moving forward into the Michigan game if they win these 2 games against Michigan and Indiana, obviously in the Big Ten championship game against Oregon, and then on to the college football playoff where I think Ohio State will be, whether they beat Indiana or not, to be honest. I think Ohio State will still get in the college football playoff at 10-2 or 12-1 or 11-2. I think Ohio State will be in the playoff as a 2-loss team because of that win over Penn State. Even if they lose to Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, that would mean that they beat an undefeated Indiana, which they would get credit for that. If they lose to Indiana, they would still have that win over Penn State as a 10-2 team, which is better than most of the wins that the SEC teams have. So I think Ohio State's in with 2 losses regardless. Obviously, they want that first-round bye. They want to beat Oregon. They want that revenge game so badly against Oregon. So we'll see what happens. But C.J. Hicks could be a big part of those plans. Could not. We'll see. But I'm willing to make that bet and say that he's going to have somewhat of a role for the Buckeyes this weekend against Indiana because of how much Indiana has prepared. They haven't really seen that wrinkle that much on film, especially with CJ. They saw it with Mitchell Melton. They haven't seen it with CJ. That's basically going to wrap it up for the Ohio State side of things. I do have a few games that I'm going to talk about. Obviously, I'm going to get off here because the Steelers play tonight, and I'm a Steelers fan. I know a lot of Ohio State fans. You're also Browns fans. Come at me. We'll see what happens. The Steelers are terrible on Thursday night on the road. I'm sure the Browns will probably upset them and obviously upset me. So we'll see what happens. Make sure to hit the like button below. Yes, Doug, thank you so much for reminding me. Hit the like button. It really helps out the video. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Every week when we go live, you'll get an update when you subscribe to the YouTube channel. Let's talk about the games, though. There's some good stuff here. Ole Miss at Florida. Very intrigued by that. Noon on ABC. I'm super intrigued by that. Florida's playing some pretty decent football right now. Just beat a LSU team that I think kind of sucks. So we'll see if they can keep it up. Ole Miss is good. Ole Miss is, probably getting into the college football playoff at 10-2 if they can get through the next 2 weeks against Florida and Mississippi State. Mississippi State looks like a walkover in the Egg Bowl. Of course, famous last words in the Egg Bowl. That game is crazy. But this Ole Miss team has a chance to kind of solidify itself into the college football playoff if it beats Florida. Florida, meanwhile, just trying to get to a bowl game, plugging along, and they look pretty good right now with DJ Lagway, the freshman at quarterback. I'm intrigued by that. Illinois Rutgers, classic Big Ten. Sage, Ohio wants me to pick Northwestern Michigan. Michigan's going to beat Northwestern. Iowa, Maryland. Give me Maryland. I think Iowa's offense is back to being a mess without Brendan Sullivan at quarterback. I'll take Michigan State over Purdue. I think Purdue's the worst Big Ten team we've seen in actually a really long time, even worse than like some of those old Rutgers teams. I'm taking Penn State on the road, but I like the point. I'm taking the points there. I think Minnesota's going to keep that game really close. Wisconsin, Nebraska. I guess I'm just picking all the Big Ten games for Sage, Ohio here. Give me Nebraska. Why not? And then I'm taking UCLA over USC. I think USC's in a bad spot. I'm intrigued by North Carolina, Boston College. Shout out to our guy, Andy Backstrom, Boston College grad. I think Boston College is going to win that game against North Carolina, but I'm intrigued by it. There's not a lot else here. Colorado, Kansas is interesting. I think Kansas can win that game, really can win that game against Colorado. Colorado's playing really good football right now at 8-2. They're 6-1 in the Big 12. All they've got to do is win out. Kansas lost a lot of games close early in the season. Now they're 4-6. If they win the next two, they're going to they're going to a bowl. And I think that's what you play for when you get to 6 losses. You just try to get to 6 wins and get to a bowl, get those extra bowl practices for next year. Kansas is plucky, and I think that they can beat Colorado. I'm not going to pick them to beat Colorado. But, we'll see what happens. Stanford, Cal, both those teams suck, but it's a rivalry game. It's worth, kind of hanging out, seeing what happens. Pitt, Louisville is interesting to me. I think Louisville's going to win that game and give Pitt a 4th, I think, straight loss. Pitt's kind of in a spiral here. Not good on offense at all. And then, obviously, 2 huge games at night. Army, Notre Dame. Undefeated Army against Notre Dame at Yankee Stadium. Notre Dame might blow them out. We'll see. Might. I didn't say they will. I said might. Washington State, Oregon State for the Pac-12 championship. They're in Corvallis. So when we were in Oregon for the Ohio State-Oregon game, I took a detour from the highway from Portland down to Eugene and went through Corvallis. Corvallis is just beautiful. And with that being said, Washington State's going to win that game pretty easily. I think Oregon State's kind of bad. So I think Oklahoma's probably going to lose pretty badly at home to Alabama. A&M's probably going to beat Auburn. I'll take Iowa State over Utah. I'll take Vandy over LSU just because I think it would be hilarious for Vandy to beat LSU in a night game at Death Valley. Like, that would just give me so much joy. Kansas State's probably going to beat Cincinnati. And then Arizona State BYU is just a huge game, and I'm really intrigued by it. I think BYU is going to win the game in Tempe. It would be a statement win for the Cougars. But Arizona State's kind of got a little bit of that Sun Devil magic going on right now. So we'll see what happens. Out there in the Big 12, I can't imagine what's going to happen if Arizona State wins and gives BYU a second loss in the Big 12, and Kansas wins and gives Colorado another loss in the Big 12. That would send that conference into a little bit of chaos, I think. Like, there's some fun stuff going on in college football, and I've chosen the last few weeks, even as an Ohio State reporter, to see the sport not through the college football playoff lens. It has helped me tremendously. If you're kind of beaten down by the college football playoff and the arguments about Big Ten versus SEC and who's played who and you ain't played anybody and this team's strength of schedule, I just block it out. Like, it's not that I don't care, because Ohio State's going to probably end up in the playoff based on either a Big Ten championship or an at-large with the strength of schedule and some key wins. But, like, in March, when we're all complaining that there's no football on, we're not going to choose to debate Week 13's strength of schedule metrics when comparing Indiana and Ole Miss. We're going to talk about how awesome that BYU-Arizona State game was, or how cool it was to see, my Ohio Bobcats go on the road and beat Toledo in weeknight action last night to take sole possession of first place in the MAC. Like, I've chosen to see the sport through those kind of lenses rather than just looking at it strictly through who's going to the playoff and who's not. And the sport has been really enjoyable the last few weeks for me, and I encourage you guys all to try to do the same. When you're not watching Ohio State, just don't look at it through the playoff lens. Just look at it through college football being college football. It's better for everybody. We'll get to the playoff when we get there. We'll get to the conference championships when we get there. Rivalry week next week is going to feel the same as it always does. You're going to have that hatred for Michigan in your heart. I know you guys will. And you can get all of the coverage for it at lettermenrow.com. Before you get there, though, Ohio State and Indiana, top 5 matchup. Number 2 Buckeyes versus number 5 Hoosiers in the Horseshoe. It doesn't get much better. I know it's Indiana. The logo doesn't really look that great. It's a top 5 matchup in the Horseshoe in November. It does not get any better than that. Lettermen Row will be there every step of the way. Tim May, the 41-year vet, he'll be there helping me out. Spencer Holbrook, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you guys in the Horseshoe on Saturday. We'll see you on Friday for bold predictions at lettermenrow.com.